Erin, that's like asking me to pick a favorite child, which is really difficult. We were just talking about kids. I have 2 favorite trips. I told you already, I'm wearing my Warren Buffett shirt. So in 2018, I went to Omaha, Nebraska with my husband to fulfill an item on my accounting bucket list, which was to see Warren Buffett at his annual shareholders conference. And it was amazing. It was just incredible to see the man in real life, very far away on a stage. But that was one of my most memorable trips. I absolutely loved it.
Welcome. This is Uncommon Sense, a CPA podcast presented by the Heshe CPA Knowledge Center. The center is an initiative of the CPA Education Foundation, the charitable arm of the chartered professional accountant profession in Alberta. For the record, this CPA podcast isn't about bean counting. Our episodes feature conversations with Alberta CPAs sharing their insights on a wide range of timely topics.
Hello, I'm Erin Schwartz, Director of the CPA Education Foundation. Our guest today is Nikki Marchiel, and I'm so glad that Nikki was able to join me. Nikki is a chartered professional accountant. She decided to obtain her CPA designation after working at a large company in Edmonton and realizing she had limited opportunities for advancement. She worked in accounting firms, first in the audit group and then in the small business group. After the birth of her first child, she began teaching accounting to aspiring CPAs and continues to do this work today. She also develops curriculum for the CPA Professional Education Program, works for CPA Alberta in the Practical Experience Group, and holds a master's degree in education. On this episode of Uncommon Sense, Nikki will talk about her passion for teaching, the importance of financial literacy, and her recent work in the area of raising financially literate children. That's a lot of ground to cover, so let's get started. Welcome, Nikki.
Thank you.
Let's start our discussion by getting a bit of background on you, Nikki. You mentioned that you have had what you call an unconventional career path for a CPA. Can you briefly walk us through that and also talk about what professional roles you're currently filling?
So I started in what I would call a traditional path, which was when I was doing my CA to do work in a professional accounting firm. So as most of us do, starting out, or back then in the CA designation, working in a firm. And I really enjoyed my time working in a firm. But when I was doing CASB, which was the legacy designation, the professional education program, we used to have weekends, which were called face-to-face sessions. And there was an instructor that was there that had an unconventional path. And I found her to be so inspiring. So shout out Christy Dewald, because she was a yoga instructor, Pilates instructor, and I believe she was doing contract accounting work at the time. And to see somebody who had what I would call an unconventional path. I hadn't met somebody like her, and it showed me that it was possible. You didn't have to do what everybody else did. And she was really fulfilling what her passions were and also getting to do work at the same time. So that was really eye-opening to see that.
That's really cool. Christy was one of my profs in my undergrad, and I loved her.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more.
It's really cool that you got that so early on in your career, because I feel like we talk to so many people who have that realization or that inspiration later on in their career where they realize, hey, I don't have to do it this way. I can do it my own way. I can, chase my own passions and stuff. So that's really great that you got that kind of right out the gate.
It planted a seed that I don't know if it would have been there before. And Christy was also an exceptional instructor. She's not the only one. There were a few others I can think of that were fantastic, but they made me think, maybe I could do this. Not at that point, but I thought, this seems really interesting. And it planted that seed.
Yeah. So then you eventually did pursue your master's in education. What was that journey like for you as a CPA, then going kind of into that very different route?
I went for my master's of education after having a lot of experience teaching. So I did the experience first, and then realized, hey, there's a lot of things I don't know. And if there's a lot of things that I don't know, it made me curious, how can I get more knowledge? How can I get better in this area? And so that was the start. I wanted to get more skills in that area, and I was working on curriculum development for CPA Canada, but I felt I had the accounting knowledge and that piece. But where I was lacking is, how can we strengthen curriculum development? What can I do to get that education piece? Because I didn't have any training. It was all just work experience, which is great, is fantastic, but I think you need to marry both pieces.
Yeah. I imagine you figure it out as you go and you learn from others and trial and error and all of that. But it's also probably one of those things where you don't know what you don't know. So there might be, I don't know, methodologies or approaches or something that you wouldn't have even considered before getting that formal education.
100%. Yeah, it was really good. And the interesting thing too is, when I was doing my master's, yes, there were a lot of teachers, but there were people from all walks of life. Police officers, EMTs, nurses. And so just a wide, yes, it was really interesting. It was a wide variety of people that were coming into this looking to get that additional education for their respective career paths.
So just like you within the profession of accounting, in a teaching role, people in various other professions, same kind of thing.
Yep, exactly.
Never would have thought, but hey, here you are.
Absolutely.
As an accounting educator, you've taught at NAIT, as well as the CPA Western School of Business, and worked with CPA Canada in various capacities as well. So what is it about teaching that you enjoy so much?
I think that teaching is the flip side of learning. So I am a lifelong learner. I hope I never stop learning because I enjoy it so much. And so to me, because I love learning, teaching is an extension of that.
Yeah.
So that's why I went into it, because I loved the learning. And as soon as I finished my designation, got my designation, and I started exam marking in the CA program. It was literally the next offering. When I was working in firms, I also loved working with students. And I thought, this is my favorite part of the job, is working with students, teaching them on an audit, how to audit, how to do file work. I really enjoyed the working with students. And then I got pregnant, and I was 8.5 months pregnant. I went to Calgary against my doctor's advice to do a training session for facilitating. It was all fine. It worked out fine, Karen. I had her 2 weeks later. It was all good. It was fine. It was fine. But I did this training session, and I thought I will try facilitating, which is doing online teaching for students. At that time, it was in the CA program in Casby. And I did that when my daughter was 3 months old. So I was on my mat leave, had my little baby in one arm, and I was typing with the other. And I loved it so much that I didn't go back to the firm. I thought, this is what I want to do. And it was really scary to turn down full-time employment, going back to work. But I thought, this is the time. I'm going to try it. And being a CPA, I sat down, I crunched all the numbers.
Of course.
Of course.
There were spreadsheets.
There was a couple of spreadsheets. There may or may not have been, like a Word document, the pros and cons.
Was there also a PowerPoint presentation for your partner to convince them to get on board?
No, there was no PowerPoint.
Didn't go quite that far.
No, and it wasn't difficult at all to convince him.
Awesome.
It wasn't. I just had to show him the numbers, and he was like, okay, this sounds great.
Yeah.
Also, being a CPA, I truly felt if this doesn't work out, I can always go back.
There will always be, even if you're not going back to the firm where you were before, there will be job postings that appeal, that I'm qualified for, and that I can get.
Absolutely. So it did feel fairly risk-free. And during my maternity leave, I took that time to, again, hone those skills.
Right.
Brand new skill set to do this facilitating. But because I loved it, it didn't really feel like work.
Right. Wow. So really, use that time to get set up.
And that was 16 years ago. So my daughter is just turned 16.
Yeah.
So this February. It was 16 years ago that I started. And I always said, when I get bored of this, when it feels it's run its course, I will stop. And it hasn't.
Hasn't happened.
Hasn't happened yet.
Maybe never will.
You never know.
That's fantastic. Certainly sounds like a loss for the firm where you were, because I imagine you were thinking back to like my experiences as a student going through. You probably were a really strong, senior or manager on files. Those individuals who would really help you to actually fully learn it. Those people were so, so valuable. But obviously had to pursue your passion, and it certainly worked out.
Absolutely.
16 years of facilitating. How has teaching of accounting changed or evolved over those years? I mean, obviously you started, you said, under the CASB program, and now it's PEP. And I mean, even that's changing. That's maybe a little more future facing, but what's changed in that area?
I don't recall that there were videos when I first started teaching. And I record what feels like a shocking number of videos for CPA Canada. So that's one thing that I've really recognized has changed is it's meeting learners where they are at. This generation of learners wants videos. It helps them with their learning. And I will tell you, if I were a student again, I would want videos as well. So that is something that I've noted has really changed, is that education technology piece. As well, since COVID, I have only done one in-person session for the weekend workshops.
Right.
Virtual was not an option prior to COVID. And now, for the vast majority, it's on Zoom. So it's great for learners that don't live near a city where the session is being held. It's great for parents. I've seen little kids running around in the background, people that need some flexibility. It's great for that. But that's a huge change, too, that, again, is fairly recent. And I don't know if that's going to go back or not.
Right. Now, is it all virtual, or is it the choice where they can do in-person or virtual?
It's the choice, but they need a critical mass in order to be able to hold an in-person session, is my understanding.
Right.
And so based on that, I've only done one that was in person. Maybe it's just specific to where I live, Edmonton. I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
But it does seem like more and more, it's just that flexibility of having the virtual option appeals to a lot of people.
Yeah, it makes it more accessible for a lot of folks.
Yeah.
And again, it's meeting people where they're at, right? So if that's what's working and that's what's making it accessible, then that's what we can do.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's turn to financial literacy and what you've done to advance financial literacy, in your communities, especially amongst young people. So maybe to start, can you define, your own version, like what is financial literacy? What does that mean to you?
I define it as being comfortable with making financial decisions. That's my own definition. And I want to be very clear. I am not a financial planner. I am not a financial literacy expert. I am somebody who is very passionate about financial literacy. So that's how I would define it.
Yeah. So what happened in your, professional career or personal life that turned that into such a passion for you?
Well, when I was reflecting on that question, I was several different things. And the first would have to be my parents. I grew up in a house where my parents are both small business owners. They're now retired, but that was our life, family business. And it was always talked about. Right. One of my memories, I don't remember how old I was. I would say maybe 8 or 10. And my dad is at a restaurant, literally on a napkin, showing me this is how you finance a business. I had no idea what he was talking about, but he was so passionate about it. It was important to him. And kids learn by repetition, by osmosis. And so even though I didn't understand it at the time, it was just part of our lexicon. It was part of our always talking about it. It was normal to talk about we didn't use the term financial literacy.
Right.
But we always talked about it. It was never something that we shied away from.
Yeah.
So we always talked about it. And my dad gave me a book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. Not sure if you've heard of it.
Yeah.
Great book as a young adult. And that was a very eye-opening book. So I became really interested in this idea that I myself could control my finances. I am in charge of that. I'm making those decisions. I thought that book was really great. And I also read Millionaire Next Door as a young adult. And I found that was eye-opening as well, because it was this idea that an average, ordinary person can become a millionaire.
Yeah.
And so I think those were formative ideas that I had. I also, just before I started doing my designation, I had an uncle that committed suicide because of struggles with money.
Oh, gosh.
And left his family. And that was an event that I think made it so important, because you understand money is this thing that we have to deal with every single day for most of us. And it has the power to make your lives incredible. And it has the power to destroy your life and everything in between.
Yeah.
So I think there were, again, several seminal moments and definitely the family impact, which is why I'm so passionate about carrying it on to my kids and to my family too, because I recognize that I was given a gift by my family that we talked about these things. Not everyone has had that.
No. And certainly not to that level either. Thinking back to my own childhood, definitely not explaining financing on a napkin in a restaurant. More so just the comments of, we can't afford that, or, things like that. The tiny pieces of it, as opposed to kind of the bigger conversation. So that seems pretty amazing that you got that at a young age.
But did you find that that was helpful, having those conversations? We can't afford this.
Yeah, I think so. I think it probably could have, if I was doing that now with my kids, it would be more of a conversation of trying to understand the value of money. I think I even already do this sometimes. My eldest is 4 and, talking about, I want to skip daycare. Well, mom and dad have to go to work. Well, why do you have to go to work? And it's like, well, I love what I do. But also because we go to work, then we get paid money. And remember how when we go to the store, we buy things with money. So understanding kind of what money is, first of all, because, that's not something you just know, but also understanding the trade-offs and things, right? We could do that, but then we wouldn't be able to do these other things. And so we were kind of thinking maybe we would save up to do this. Or, hey, you can choose, we can go on an outing today. We love going to the science center, the indoor playgrounds, the library, those types of things. But understanding that there's a cost associated with that and that those are trade-offs, both in terms of cost and time, right? So kind of planting those seeds young in that age-appropriate way, right? Because obviously where your kids are at is very different than where my kids are at, right? I've got the really littles and then yours are teenagers. So kind of your ability to understand it. Whereas I feel like in my upbringing, it probably was just kind of those lines, regardless of whether I was 3 years old or 15 years old kind of thing. Probably could have used a more robust education on that. And no shade to my parents. My parents are amazing. But just saying, I think what you got was unusual, unfortunately, and hopefully can become more and more regular. But yeah, it's pretty amazing.
It is. And I think we try to impress upon our kids as well. My husband as well benefited from having those conversations in his family. So the two of us had this strong foundation for financial literacy, which we can then pass on to our kids, and explaining that not everyone has had this. And sometimes you may look and you may see somebody that you think is making a quote unquote bad choice.
Right.
Before you judge that person, just understand that there could be so many things going on with that person that you don't know about,
Yeah.
up to and including maybe that they didn't have this strong foundation, this ongoing discussion that our family has.
Yeah.
And so, for example, we do holiday hamper deliveries. We have done this. It's a tradition. And, I'm really proud of our kids that I feel they don't judge because we always have these conversations. It's not about having pity or sympathy, but it's about having empathy and just understanding, everybody has a different position in life and just not judging that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's huge. And also knowing too, even, again, you might be thinking, hey, that seems like a bad choice, but also knowing that everyone's situation is different and what might not be the right choice for you actually might be the right choice for someone else.
Who's to say that we're making the right choices? We're making the choices that we feel comfortable with. But again, somebody else could look at us and say, for example, we spend too much money on travel.
Right.
I've heard that comment.
Yeah. But that's where your values lie.
Exactly.
Yeah. The discussions I've had with financial planners of investing versus paying down debt and looking at what the rates are and things like that. And there have definitely been times in our adult life where we haven't made what would be considered the smarter choice just because of our own comfort levels around debt.
Yes.
And, I'm like, yeah, I know it makes more financial sense to borrow at a lower rate and then invest at a higher rate, but I don't want more debt right now, and I just can't get past that. So we're not going to do it.
And if it causes you stress, then it's probably not worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why is financial literacy important to people, no matter what stage of their lives they're at? I think you've touched on that a little bit, but just wanted to check in if there was anything else you wanted to add.
I think that money is one of those few things that's a common denominator, regardless of who you are. I remember sitting, my kids were doing tennis lessons. I was chatting with a neighbor, and as you can tell, I sort of like financial literacy. So we were talking about kids and financial literacy. And she said, I think it's so important for kids to understand money because it doesn't matter what you do for a job. You're a CPA, as she said to me, you're a CPA. So it makes sense that you care about this. Yeah. But she was a nutritionist, dietitian, nothing to do in the field of financial literacy. And she said, it doesn't matter what job it is. Money cuts through all facets of life. Yep. Try going through a day without spending, thinking about, or using money.
No thanks.
It's really tough, though, right?
I don't think I could.
It's really tough.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a common denominator. It just, it doesn't matter what stage of your life that you're at. And it's never too late. I went out for dinner with a friend who was telling me she has a relative. I think she's 63 or so years of age, just bought her first house.
Oh, wow.
It's amazing. That's taking control of your finances and your life.
Good for you.
Amazing.
That's a big milestone.
And so it's never too late. It doesn't matter. You don't have to start out at 5 years old. It doesn't matter. But
unless you're Nikki's kid. Sorry.
It's all good. When my son was in grade 2, he came home one day and he said, I was talking at recess with one of my friends, and do you know, we were talking about stocks and they don't even know what the stock market is?
Oh my gosh.
And I said, oh, so how did you explain it to him? And he says, well, I just said, I own shares in Netflix. And what do you own shares in? And I was cringing, of course.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I said, well, we talk to you guys about it because we're very interested in it. Mm-hmm. And so we talk about it, but not all families do. And other families could be talking about amazing, interesting things that our family doesn't talk about. Every family has different conversations.
Yeah.
Ours just happens to be sometimes more around these kinds of things.
So it's obviously, like you said, it's you and your partner, it's important for you to bring in with your children, but you can see how that ripple effect happens where it's, like 8-year-olds on the playground talking about the stock market now.
Absolutely, yes. Even last week, 2 weeks ago, I was driving, again, my son and a friend to basketball practice, and it was at a different school. And I said, I know that school. I did a financial literacy session there. And the kid in the back says, what's financial literacy? And I can just see my son is like just giving me the eyes in the mirror.
Puts his headphones on or something?
Pretty much. And I said, well, this is what it is. And the kid says, oh, that actually sounds really cool. You should come to our school and do that. And again, I can just see my son is like, please, Mom, no. Please no.
Oh my gosh. Well, let's dive further into that. So a lot of your recent work has been to help young people develop their financial literacy knowledge. Obviously, you with your own kids, but broader than that as well. It certainly feels like raising kids today is, that's probably unfair. Always raising kids has probably been very difficult. But there's just so many different things coming at us at parents, the social media and online presence and various different aspects of kind of what impacts childhood now. But financial literacy being one piece, especially, the world we're living in, inflation and all these, big scary things happening. It's important to prepare your children for all of these things. And like you've said, for you, financial literacy is a passion for you and also a high importance area for your family. So maybe can you talk a little more about what you've been doing? We say young people, so what age range are you talking about and what type of financial literacy skills come in at each stage?
Yeah, young people is maybe a hard one to define. When I would have typically said 18 and under, but when I'm teaching at NAIT, I'm seeing 18-year-olds, 18,
right.
to 22 is sort of a general kind of range there. I still would consider that to young people.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's a hard and fast definition there. But in terms of those skills, it's just understanding the basics about financial literacy, which to me is actually, it's very simple, but that doesn't mean it's easy. When I say it's simple, again, thinking about Warren Buffett, who has really simple advice. Spend less than you make.
Yeah.
Save and invest. Invest in yourself, which means educating yourself. Doesn't have to be expensive. The library, trust me, has a ton of amazing books.
Yes.
There's all kinds of great online resources. So it's simple skills, but again, not always easy because it requires a mindset. And it's the mindset can be really difficult for a lot of people to understand. And now you've mentioned inflation. We now also have tariffs. The stock market is not doing well. I can tell you that I read a ton of books on this, and I still know for myself that looking at that balance in my investment holdings is going to strike fear in my heart. So guess what? I haven't done it. And that's okay, because I know myself.
Yeah.
It was the same thing when COVID happened. I heard of, from friends of friends, people that sold everything as COVID hit because they were scared. And I understand that.
Yeah.
Completely understand that fear.
And things that were meant to be long-term, like this was like saving for retirement decades down the road type investments that people just,
I remember talking to a neighbor and she said, we just retired like 3 months before. I don't know what we're going to do now. Terrifying.
Yeah.
Scary.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of mindset that I think is involved with financial literacy. It's not just the nuts and bolts and this is what you should do, but it's putting both of those pieces together.
Yeah. Yeah, and that emotional response, which comes from, a lot of people, it's depending on our upbringing, right? What strikes fear, what strikes confidence, what fuels you, and kind of what that emotional response is, which then sometimes does translate to action. So having an understanding of how kind of all of that plays together is so important.
It is.
Yeah. What are some of the most common problems people face if they lack financial literacy skills and knowledge?
I recently read a study, and I actually looked it up to make sure that I had this correct. So this was a survey that was conducted in September of 2024, and it was by a reputable source. So I made sure of that. And it was saying that 47% of Canadians report living paycheck to paycheck.
Sorry, how many?
47% of Canadians report living paycheck to paycheck. This proportion rises to 54% of Canadians aged 18 to 34 and 57% among those aged 35 to 54. In the United States, 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck.
Oof. So the majority of our working, like our core working, 18 to 54,
Correct.
I think was, over 50%.
Yes. Another study, this one was done April to June 2024. This was a Canadian government, the Canadian Social Survey, and it was talking about the impact that financial strain can have on mental health, because I do feel that is a really important consideration. And it said, when asked about financial-related stress in spring 2024, more than 1/3, 35% of Canadians described most days as quite a bit or extremely stressful due to financial issues. This was similar to the proportion that reported having financial stress 2 years earlier at 33%. So think about that. 35% of Canadians, 1/3 of Canadians, most days quite a bit or extremely stressed due to financial issues.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about financial literacy, it has real-world implications, because when we see the impact that has,
Yeah. Huge.
it's huge.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's not really taught in our schools. So as parents or family members, you don't have to be a parent.
Community members.
Community members, absolutely. Aunts, uncles, grandparents. It takes a village to raise kids.
Yeah.
But this is why it is so important, because life is stressful enough.
Yeah.
And having that additional stress, it really has some serious mental health impacts on individuals.
Of course. I mean, as you shared about even your uncle, right?
Yeah.
And that's not the only story like that.
No, it isn't.
Unfortunately. Again, thinking back, like, hey, you turn 18, you can get a credit card, you can go spend. And unfortunately, it's one of those things where you could kind of get yourself into a hole, like starting from a deficit and then trying to build back up can sometimes really have a long-term impact, right? It's quick to go away, but hard to rebuild type of situation. So if you have any of that kind of literacy and understanding in advance, you're hopefully less likely to get into that kind of position.
Show your kids, if you have a credit card, show them on the statement where it says they now have to show you, if you only pay the minimum payment, this is how many years it would take to pay off the balance. Shocking.
Yeah.
So I think that's something I wish I knew
Yeah.
many years ago. It was obviously never disclosed back then either,
Yeah.
but it's just another good way to make it tangible to kids.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Well, Nikki, this has been a fantastic discussion, but we are out of time. So I'm hoping I can convince you to join me so that we can continue our conversation about financial literacy for young people and the importance of good informed financial management no matter one's age. I look forward to talking with you further, Nikki.
Thanks for having me, Erin. I look forward to the next episode.
Listeners, be sure to watch for part 2 of this episode of Uncommon Sense featuring CPA Nikki Marchiel.
The Uncommon Sense podcast is presented by the CPA Education Foundation and funded by the Heshi CPA Knowledge Center. The Knowledge Center was created through a generous donation to the CPA Education Foundation by the late Brian Heshi. Brian was a distinguished Albertan, business leader, CPA, educator, and community builder. His generosity and commitment to education underpinned his good works across Alberta throughout his lifetime. We would like to acknowledge that the CPA Education Foundation offices are situated on the traditional Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 territories and Métis Nation homeland. The Foundation acknowledges that we reside on traditional and ancestral territories of many Indigenous, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Their histories and culture influence our community to this day. The CPA Education Foundation is committed to helping build a province where Indigenous people and their voices and experiences are heard, valued, respected, and celebrated. Technical and recording services for this podcast provided by Wolf Willow Studios in Edmonton. If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to like, subscribe, and tell your friends about us. If you have any comments on the podcast, write to us at cpaef@cpaalberta.ca. To learn more about the CPA Education Foundation and the Heshi CPA Knowledge Center, visit cpaalberta.ca/foundation. Thanks for listening.